Thank you, Sharon. As she said, I'm not Kerri Muller. She is much smarter and cleverer than I am. Kerri has been very, very fortunate to drop this on me, and it's also, as I looked at a presentation last night to work out what I was talking about, I'm also very, very fortunate that I've got to try and fit 22 slides in the next 12 minutes. So thank you very much, Kerri. Within water allocation planning, we need to account for socio-economic and environmental uses of the water. On Eyre Peninsula, there was a need, and there was a recognised need to manage the water, as the potable water supply was very, very limited, and the groundwater was a main source by which that water could be sourced. There was anecdotal evidence at the time that there was ongoing environmental damage from the level of water use on the peninsula, as by noted from a number of the wetlands from Paradise Swamp in Newey South and Lake Pilly. So back in 1984, back then the Engineering Water Supply Department found concerns with or had concerns about the water use. And so they were prescribed back in 1987 with the first water allocation plan adopted in 2000 and 2001 through the Southern Basins and the Musgrave water allocation plans. There's a new water allocation plan which is currently sitting on the Minister's desk awaiting to be adopted, and what I'm going to talk about is some of the policies we put into the water allocation plan to help manage the environmental sustainability and the environmental risk from the allocation policies. Legislation, I don't read all of that. Basically, all it says is that legislation says that we need to account for the environment when we're doing water allocation planning, and that it's a legitimate user of the water resources for any time we do a water allocation plan. So I'm going to talk about the process by which we try to do that. So there's a number of GDEs which do exist across the Eyre Peninsula. It is dry and they are relatively sparsely distributed, but they are there. There's a number of different wetlands across both Southern Basins and Musgrave. There's a number of creeks with associated wetland systems as well. This is the Muller wetland complex and river system. We have phreatophytes, which are scattered throughout the prescribed areas. There's some springs associated mostly with the wetlands. Marine discharges, which also have important environmental outcomes, and we have a number of aquifer and caves and karstic systems as well. All of these have an associated environmental assets which need to be considered when we're trying to do our water allocation planning. So the first thing we try to do is try and work out conceptually, I'll talk about wetlands in this one here, work out conceptually what is the dependence of our GDEs upon the water resources by which we're trying to prescribe. For this situation, it's groundwater. For the wetlands, the environmental asset by which we try to match the risk to changes in water level was to the vegetation. They're there perennially. There's very limited information on the other assets which will also be using these wetlands. So it was a lot easier. It was a pragmatic choice to base it on the vegetation. What we did find is that through these systems we had a very, very clear zonation of our vegetation types, from the aquatic systems up to the more terrestrially based ones, with the baumias going through the hydrocotyls up to the samphires, melaleucas and garniers up on the top of the vertical gradient. After we went and visited these different wetlands, we came up with indicators, I guess, of the different vegetation types which represented those different zonations. Again, 22 slides in 12 minutes. I won't go into much detail, but to say that we did that. There are a number of wetlands that exist across the Musgrave and the Southern Basins areas, and they do have different hydrological characteristics. All of them, we found, though, had very, very similar zonation, and what was the driving factor between the zonation and the difference between the different wetlands was the extent or the width of those different vegetation zonations. This is Sleaford Mere down in the Southern Basins water allocation plan area, and it's permanently inundated. And so we found that you've got the central parts of the mere, which didn't affect the vegetation so much, but then the zonation came around the outside. And so what we're talking about here is managing between the maximum and the minimum amounts to manage the impact upon that particular type. Very, very different from what we're talking about for other wetlands, such as, or damp lands, such as Lake Pilly, which never really gets water into it, and whenever it does, all the guys go out there with their four-wheel drives and go crazy on there. But with this one here, we find that we do have encroachment of the sandfire down in towards the middle. You can't see it so much in this one here. In the background, you can see a little bit more of where those sandfires are actually going out into the middle of the wetland. So changes in wetland, in groundwater level, is going to have a very different impact upon the zonation of these different wetlands. And then you've got other ones which are more the halfway between, where you have a seasonal inundation as it intersects the regional groundwater level. Then there are other wetlands, such as Big and Little Swamp, which aren't connected to the regional groundwater level and therefore aren't so much influenced by the activities of the water allocation plan. But the community pressure and interest around these wetlands, which are listed under the Directory of Important Wetlands for South Australia, is that there are still policies which do work to try and manage these systems. The other, one of the other GDE types which was important and high on the agenda to be managed because of their social and environmental value is the distribution of phreatophytes across the prescribed areas, mostly in the form of red gums and water gums. Now, we found that they were a little bit different in terms of the distribution and their life history strategies for Eyre Peninsula from what we've found in other places, particularly the red gums. Normally we find red gums across the banks and the shores of wetlands or along waterways. What we're finding here is that a lot of the red gums are scattered sparsely throughout the landscape. And we haven't got any evidence to say this is the case, but we conceptually believe that the way they are recruiting in these environments is that we're getting ponding from heavy rainfall events from which we'll get germination as the surface water recedes, and then a sequence of other fortunate rainfall events will occur that will enable the establishment of these seedlings into recruits into the landscape. In this situation here, the other ongoing management is the joint management between water and broader NRM management are things like you're managing your grazing to try and manage these populations to exist into the future. Now, the other interesting one, and it was a very, very high value and high interest to the community, were the offshore discharges. It is very, very important in terms of maintaining the groundwater viability for use in terms of stopping seawater intrusion, but it's also got some value in terms of managing the environmental component of the peninsula. What we have in some of these systems, so the Kerri Bay, Granfield and Telka, is that we've got some reverse estuaries where we get high evaporation rates close up to the shore, with higher salinity levels, which then drops down, and you get higher salinity levels which affects the seagrasses and so forth underneath. Now, what we're finding in some areas is that we're getting marine discharges of fresher groundwater into these areas here, displacing some of that higher salinity water, and you're getting some vegetation which is supporting some of the local bird life. You get rupias and things like that, which are growing in some of these upwelling areas. It's very, very poorly understood, but we have got policies in place to try and manage and protect those upwellings because of the anecdotal evidence that is saying that these things are actually occurring, and it does seem to be the case. So, we've got this information now about some of the GDEs which we're interested in, and the assets on which they are dependent upon those ecosystems. So how do we do this? Water allocation plans, they can't manage rainfall. Some people wish we could, I wish we could, but we can't. We can manage the take. That's the only thing the water allocation plan can do. So what we can do in terms of the work that we do is try and manage what is the influence and try and manage the risk of the take and only the take from these systems. The way that we did this here is through environmental protection buffers. So we did some calculations using the TEAS equation, which uses a specific yield and the transmissivity to try and work out what is the cone of influence, the cone of drawdown, which is going to be affecting the dynamics of groundwater that is supporting these different ecosystems. Now, we're assuming that an acceptable level of risk, and this was based on heavy community consultation, that an acceptable level of risk was a 1 centimetre drawdown in the centre of a wetland was going to be an acceptable level of risk for what we're talking about here. 10 centimetres under red gums, as they're expected to be able to chase that water a little bit more in terms of plasticity of how they can survive. And this is assuming a take of 10 meg a year, which is around about what the maximum that anyone's going to try and use out of these systems. We also have another quite innovative process in which the consumptive limits from year to year are based on the storage volume and the capacity and the status of the aquifers which are managed across the prescribed areas. That is,